Hi, this is the overview for the U.S. and the World Socratic Project. And the first question I'm going to answer here is how the project fits in to the scope of the year. So the way the course is designed, our students have already done two big projects that their big product at the end of the project were timed rights. One was a DBQ and one was a free response question. The project right before this one also included a Socratic as a major product, and we very intentionally put this project in immediately following a project that had a Socratic so they would be able to spiral their skills of discussion and contribution and norms and active listening. There are some other key historical cog skills that they're going to be spiraling from previous projects. And one of the things that we've endeavored to do with this project is to make sure that cog skills spiral within the project. And students have plenty of opportunities to show formative assessment, so we can give hat feedback as they're stepping through each project. But more about that later. In addition to how the project fits into the scope of the year, clearly students will need to come into the project knowing a bit about World War I, and they will know this if they had taken the course previous to this, which was World History, with an emphasis on the 20th century. So they would have done projects that in which they worked on skills and also learned content that was relevant to World War I and to its aftermath, which leads eventually to World War II and then the Cold War. So they'll come in with at least a rudimentary knowledge of that narrative. In addition to that, there is a playlist and content assessment that's very specific to the U.S. emerging as a world power in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, including the U.S. Eventual involvement in the latter part of World War I. Now, with respect to what they're going to do with the project and how they'll connect that content knowledge to the current day, and the reason why I'm showing this particular slide at the very beginning is the United States went from a very reticent role in 1914 at the beginning of the First World War to a very active and actually quite decisive role, according to most historians, by 1917 and 1918. And public opinion, political winds, national political winds, definitely blowing in the direction of intervention. So looking at the United States' role as mostly an isolationist country with respect to World War I, within 3+ years, becoming very much an interventionist country. And then throughout the latter part of the 20th century, this impression of the United States as being highly interventionist and perhaps even imperialistic, according to some historians, is something that the students have a chance to explore in a number of different current events, which are occurring anywhere between 2009 and right up to the moment that we're in now, which is 2015. So with respect to the connection between the project and the skills, as I was working through taking a look at the project steps and making sure that what was getting done in the project steps were opportunities for students to practice the skills and get formative assessment on it, I made sure that all the way from step 1 all the way through step 6, that skills were definitely looping. So just one example of lots that I've got here. Contextualizing sources is a skill that the students will do in the first step of the project when they are brushing up on specific information and knowledge of the First World War. And then in step 2, they do the same thing, contextualizing the major players and major historical causes and effects that have brought the United States and also other countries into other current events. And I'll go into a little more detail as to what those choices are of current events. So again, just as one quick example, we'll be giving hat feedback and an opportunity for students to reflect on their skill growth from one step into another. And I'm using contextualizing sources just as one example, going from step 1 to step 2. The way that the project is calendared is very kind of skill focused. This particular year, the project is taking place during the weeks leading up to Thanksgiving and winter break. So with respect to the calendaring on the project, here on the 16th, we do spend a large amount of time on the first day of the project with the students reflecting on the specific COG skills that they're going to need to be able to demonstrate in the project. There's a bit of time to get oriented on the new project, probably kind of an icebreaker or, like what do we know about World War I? What do we know about these current events? And in doing that, they get a better idea of, okay, this is how I'm going to need to apply the skill or skills for this particular project and specific to step 1. So as you can see, the sequence here is certainly on making sure that they get familiar with what the COG skills are going to be for the project, they get an orientation on the project, and then they actually start to work on step 1. And with respect to the activities and the way it's calendared, there are the things that the students are actually doing, but then there's always an assessment piece. In this case, in the first one, it's formative assessment on critiquing the reasoning of others and contextualizing relevant sources. And then that loops into the next project time. And if you take a look at the calendaring, you've got critiquing the reasoning of others, you've got contextualizing relevant sources, and then that moves on as you go through steps 2 and step 3. Again, contextualizing relevant sources comes up again, and discussion and contribution preparation. So on this one, I actually spent quite a bit of time making sure that teachers would have an opportunity to be able to formatively assess how students are doing on COG skills as they go through each step, be able to have feedback on that, allow time for students to reflect on how they're doing thus far before they move on to the next piece. So moving on from that particular part, talking more about instructional moves that are really key for this project. We'll actually go ahead and take a look at the project itself. I'd say one of the most high leverage things that we're doing in this project is the opportunity for peer feedback toward the end of the project. The way the lessons are arranged, the students do a lot of collaborative work, especially around determining which current event that they are going to be working with. And we'll go into this activity real quick to give you an example of what that looks like. So in this particular case, and this is the second step, the students put into their own words their definitions of isolationism, neutrality, and interventionism. Then they get a quick overview on each one of the 5 topics that they're going to be able to choose from, which they'll compare to United States involvement with World War I, working with a team. So there's definitely a facilitator, timekeeper, and 2 other roles that are working within the group. And they work together to figure out specifically what these different 5 topics are. So in this case, it's ISIS, the Ebola outbreak of the last couple of years, the ongoing Mexican drug war, Russia's international moves in Ukraine, and the recent Middle Eastern migrant crisis. And so for each one of them, they work together to not just determine what these different issues are, but what the foreign policy options are for the United States. Another piece that we added that's new, that I noticed from last year, that is a skill, especially a historical thinking skill, that's important that a lot of students, I think, miss out on, is the whole concept of unintended consequences. So, if you make a foreign policy move, you don't just weigh the pros and cons. You also think about what are the things that could happen that you completely did not intend as a result of making this particular move. And I've gone ahead and put an article in here that specifically talks about a case of a U.S. foreign policy move that was intended to do one thing, which was actually to create a more permissive society in Uganda around transgender and gay people, but ends up putting pressure on the president of Uganda to actually sign the legislation, because otherwise the president of Uganda would look weak in the face of international pressure. So that's a piece that I think was really missing last time, that we're including in this particular part. So, and during this period of time, with respect to the cog skill and giving feedback, what I'll do, as students are actually working through these conversations, is dropping in on their individual documents and giving them very specific feedback about their ability of contextualizing sources, critiquing the reasoning of others when they go through the pros and cons of the policy, what the unintended consequences are, and I'll be sure to give them comments on that. And also during project time, kind of highlight the things that the students are doing really well with respect to demonstrating skills, and then the things that they need to grow on based on my formative assessment in the particular project steps. So that's one example of being able to do that, giving students opportunities for feedback as we're going forward. Where I was trying to get originally was which those are all, I think, pretty high leverage pieces in terms of getting students to demonstrate higher levels and to be able to goal set and reflect on their work. But another major piece of it is peer feedback. And I've got a pretty comprehensive document here and a whole project time where they do a kind of a dry run with the Socratic. It's a fish done in a fishbowl style, and the students are on the inner part of the Socratic circle. After doing a practice Socratic, will then step out to the outer circle. The students will trade places, assess each other on a number of different cog skills, actually include a narrative description of how it is that they actually earn that particular cog skill. And then students have an opportunity in project time and also independently to take a look at how they had done on this particular part before they go to the last step, which is the actual Socratic itself, for which they'll be assessed. So, for example, actually throughout the project, I have an opportunity to give them hat feedback on their discussion and contribution, since so much of the work that's done is collaborative in nature. They get an opportunity for peer feedback on discussion and contribution in the penultimate step of the project, and then they're actually summatively assessed on discussion and contribution, norms and active listening, and counterclaims in the last part of it. So that is the skills portion of it. And again, while we're here with the project steps, here are the playlists. There's a real emphasis on 18A with A push, because it really talks about U.S. foreign relations after the American Civil War. We definitely include Industrial America, because this provides kind of the cause and effect relationship between the United States becoming a global player economically after the American Civil War with international trade, and sets things up for the U.S. being more interested in expanding markets and becoming more involved politically as a result of its economic interest in the global scene. In addition to that, I also included a third perspective on U.S. involvement in World War I. There's a textbook perspective, there's Howard Zinn, and then there's Michael Medved, who kind of casts different beliefs or perceptions of the United States as quote-unquote big lies, and sets out to create a new conversation about the United States. And in this particular case, his big lie, according to him, is America's an imperialist nation and a threat to global peace. And he sets out to have a conversation, present some pretty compelling evidence that, in fact, America is not an imperialist nation compared to the nations that have come before, and has actually done a lot in terms of being able to keep the peace. So students have an opportunity to actually synthesize all three of these perspectives and critique their reasoning. So very rich opportunities for students to engage in this, both discussing with each other and in their own narrative.